All right, we're ready. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Super excited to see so many attendees for this important conversation about Proposition A. Let me start by thanking some folks that have joined us in an effort to get the best, most accurate information available out to the business community and the community at large. So a special shout out and thank you to our co-hosts for this event. And I want to recognize the Austin LGBT Chamber of Commerce, the Austin Young Chamber, the Greater Austin Asian Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Austin Black Chamber, the Austin Board of Realtors, and RECA. And I can tell you all that each of these organizations responded in a minute with the opportunity to create this forum for our community. So thank you guys for co-hosting this. I also want to thank the following partners who support excellent programming for members all year long. And that includes Amazon, Ascension Seton, Dell Technologies, PIMCO, and Wells Fargo. They sponsor all of the content that we deliver to our members all year long, and thank you. Our foundation partners are represented here on this slide. They also make sure that the business community gets the best, most accurate information on issues that they care about. Our corporate partners, of which there are many. This is the engaged business community. Thank you to everyone. And I'd also like to thank the companies that specifically sponsor our Pulse on Policy series. This is a series that is designed to deliver information to you specifically on policy issues, and thank you for your support for that. And our corporate sustainers, you can see them there: Accenture, Ascension, Dell, Enoch Keever, and Silicon Labs. And lastly, our supporting sustainers. Thank you, thank you, thank you. These are all the businesses that lean in every year to make sure that we can do events like this to make the business community as knowledgeable as possible. So here's our purpose today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Laura Huffman. I am the president and CEO of the Greater Austin Chamber of Commerce. And we are bringing this forum to you today to provide an opportunity for both sides of Prop A to present their position and to talk to you about why it is that they think you should either vote for or against Proposition A. Our goal is to provide resources to create informed voters. It is timely. Early voting starts soon, and we want on Monday, in fact, and we want to make sure that you're as prepared as possible to vote on that issue. The expectations for today are pretty straightforward. We're here to listen and learn. We've left all of the chat functions open, so you're welcome to put something in the chat. We will be monitoring that on behalf of our speakers and on behalf of Jenny. What we ask of everyone is that this is an opportunity for civil discourse. So please conduct yourselves accordingly when you use the chat functions. In a few minutes, we're going to be joined by our board chair, Nikki Graham, who's going to give us a brief overview of the policy work that the chamber has been involved with recently around public safety. Next, we're going to hear from Ed Van Eno, who is the Deputy Chief Financial Officer for the City of Austin. Ed is going to provide us with his the city's financial analysis of Prop A. He's going to talk about the budget implications, and then he's going to leave the forum. And then we're going to move straight into discussion. The discussion is going to be moderated by Jenny Lee. She is the midday anchor with KVUE News. And so now, with no further ado, Nikki, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. And I so much appreciate your leadership in bringing this forum to our members and the broader community. Hopefully now you can see me. Just by way of background, I wanted to share with you some of the work that the Chamber's been doing over the last year around public safety. Last year in August, we created a public safety task force to address the issues put forth to the Austin community around budget changes and public safety funding. We formed the task force with a diverse group of both board members and members of our executive committee. And over the last several months, in fact, over a year now, we've been discussing the various issues related to public safety in our community. We invited various guests to attend that committee, including the Deputy City Manager, the Austin Police Chief, the Greater Austin Crime Commission, and various organizations, including Just Liberty, the Austin Justice Coalition, as well as Texas Appleseed. As a result of those conversations, the board formed a statement around public safety that we shared with City Council, as well as the City Manager. The key provisions of that statement included a request to increase collaboration and accountability among City Council, the City Manager, the Police Chief, and the Police Union. Also, revised training to the curriculum and to address concerns around justice and equity. The third was to immediately restate the cadet classes to fill vacancies as quickly as possible and continue professional development for that sworn personnel. And fourth, to commit to staffing standards to plan for current and future budgets that serve a growing population and respond to changes in crime rates. These are activities that we have met frequently with the city around these 4 bullet points. Some of those have been instated, and we'll get to hear more about that today. So with that, I'd love to turn the conversation over to our moderator, Jenny Lee. As many of you have seen Jenny Lee as the midday anchor on KVUE, Jenny is one of Austin's most experienced news personalities. She has been at KVUE since 2015 and has called Austin home for over 20 years. She has won an Edward R. Murrow Award and has been recognized for her work by the Texas Associated Press Broadcasters, the Lone Star Emmy Chapter, the American Cancer Society, and the Diversity Council. So with no further ado, I'd like to turn the program over to Jenny Lee.
There I am. I was trying to start my video. Okay. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you, Nikki, and thank you, Laura. Before we get started, I wanted to pass along my appreciation to the Chamber of Commerce. You guys have been so great at everything you guys do. And for, of course, all the other co-hosts and the sponsors for putting on this event. I think it's so important now more than ever in this age of misinformation and disinformation that we get the facts out. So thank you so much for putting this on and for having me do this. So it's a big honor to act as your humble moderator today. And thanks for everyone who have registered. I think yesterday we said there have been quite a few people who have participated, and please get in your questions. We will try to answer all of it because this is a complicated topic here. So a couple of points before we get started. There are no hard time limits. So we just ask that everyone, keep it to a couple of minutes. And if you do drone on and on, I'm gonna politely ask you to just wrap it up. And of course, as with all discussions, we're gonna be civil and respectful. I don't think we're gonna have any problems with that. So let's see. So without further ado, let's just get started. So when we head to the polls, and I urge everyone to head to the polls, as Laura mentioned, I can't believe early voting is this Monday. So as we head to the polls Monday, and of course on November 2nd, here's what the ballot language is going to say. Proposition A, shall a petition ordinance be approved to enhance public safety and police oversight, transparency, and accountability by adding new Chapter 216 to establish minimum standards for the police department to ensure effective public safety and protect residents and visitors to Austin, and prescribing minimum requirements for achieving the same at an estimated cost of $271.5 million to $598.8 million over 5 years. But of course, what does that mean, right? So here's what that means. Here are the provisions. The employment of at least 2 sworn officers for every 1,000 Austinites. Maintain not less than 35% community engagement time for all frontline officers, so pro officers, not detectives. Full enrollment for no fewer than 3 full-time candidate cadet classes for the department. An additional 40 hours each year of mandatory continuing education. Enhance recruiting and retention of officers by providing incentives. Recruit, hire, and maintain a police force that reflects the diversity of the city. And finally, to ensure effective oversight of and accountability for the department. So that's Prop A. But before we debate and we hear from both sides of the campaign, I want to talk about we'll hear from, actually, we're going to get to look at the fiscal analysis of Prop A. And with that, here's the city's Chief Financial Officer, Ed Van Enu.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me here today. Thanks, Jenny, and thanks, Nikki. Thank you to the chambers, and thank you for everyone who's participating this morning in the forum. As Jenny mentioned, the proposition does have costing analysis in it, and I want to just spend a moment here this morning at the beginning of the forum to walk through those numbers, the assumptions behind the numbers that are on the proposition ballot language. As mentioned, my name is Ed Van Enu. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the City of Austin. So on the next slide, and I won't read these all because Jenny really hit on them, but these are the 4 areas of the proposition that would have a fiscal implication: the increase in sworn staffing, the additional cadet class, the additional training hours, and then the additional stipends that would be necessitated to enhance recruiting and retention. So let's just jump right into the next slide. We ran 2 scenarios here because there's a lot of assumptions that goes into a big complicated analysis like this. And we wanted to look at, on the low end, what we thought were more conservative assumptions, and then also look at a high end assumption of what the high end of the cost might be. So on the low end, population growth, on a 2 officers per 1,000 basis, population is a big factor in how many officers we'll need to be adding. We assumed a 1% population growth, also assumed a 1% wage growth. The 1% wage growth is more in line with the last contract we had with the Police Association, but wages typically have been growing higher than that, and you'll see that reflected in the high scenario. Another important factor is the vacancy rate. So when you have a large organization, you never have 100% of your position filled at any given time. There's always going to be a certain number of vacancies. So for us to hit that target of at minimum 2 officers per 1,000 population employed, not budgeted, but actually employed, what we need to do is we need to hire and train more positions than that, so that over time, as you have attrition during the cycle of our cadet classes, we have enough employees so that we don't fall below 2 officers per 1,000. You can kind of see what I'm talking about in that second bullet from the bottom, where we talk about, in order to hit the 2 officers employed provision at all times, we project that we would actually need to authorize up to 2.13 officers per 1,000, bring those staff on and train them again, so that between that cycle of time it takes to bring a cadet on, go through the cadet class, that during that time we wouldn't fall below 2 officers per 1,000. You can see a number of other assumptions related to additional training staff that would be needed in order to train the higher staffing levels. Additional substations, as we talk about bringing on hundreds of officers, we will need to add substations for them to be located in. Officers come with additional costs for vehicles and equipment. You can see the assumptions for the stipend. In the high scenario, you'll see those stipend assumptions are a little bit higher. And then at the bottom is a real important factor. On this low scenario, we're assuming that somehow, some way, within the 2 officers per 1,000, within the 2.13 authorized and employing 2 officers per 1,000, that we would be able to hit that 35% community engagement time. But the police department is projecting that in order to do that, they would have to reallocate their specialized units to patrol in order to hit their emergency response time targets. So those are the low end assumptions. I'll be faster when I go through the high end assumptions because a lot of them change. But in terms of the dollars and the staffing, On our low scenario, we're projecting we would need to add 316 police officers in the first year and about 21 or 22 per year thereafter. By far, the largest cost component is that increase in staffing projected over 5 years at a cumulative cost. I want to be clear, that's a cumulative cost over 5 years of $248.8 million. The additional cadet class costing us $8.4 million, again, cumulatively. We do project the 40 hours of training at $12.7 million, and then the additional stipends at 1.7. Grand total over 5 years of $271.5 million. I think, another way to look at it is divide that by 5, and we get an average cost of $54.3 million annually. There'll be some up and down fluctuations in that, but I think that's probably the easiest way to think about it, is about $54 million a year annually in order to comply with Prop A, if all these low end assumptions play out. So we also wanted to look at a high scenario, because a lot of these things aren't for certain, but Austin is growing rapidly. So we assumed a 2% population growth on our high scenario, annual wage growth of 2% as well. No change in that vacancy rate, no change in the additional training personnel. But really importantly here is that in order to hit the 35% community engagement time, without having to redeploy some of our specialized units, without impacting those functions, the department is projecting we would need to have 2.5 officers per 1,000 authorized, employing at any given time about 2.35 officers per 1,000 because of that vacancy rate. And that at those officer strengths, we would be able to achieve 35% community engagement, again, without redeploying our specialized units. So this drives up substantially the number of officers and the cost. You'll see that in the next slide. Again, the officers, if you could just advance one, here over 5 years, $571.8 million for the additional staffing complement. I won't go through all the other numbers because you can see them there, but a total of just short of $600 million. That would result in 680 officers being added in the first year, approximately 49 to 53 per year after, with a total annual cost of $119.8 million. I think the next one is my last slide, and this is just to show the city's fiscal year 2021-22 budget approved by the city council. It's a $1.2 billion budget. Overall, our budget's about $4.5 billion, but that includes our electric utility, our water utility, our airport, and all these enterprise funds. When you think about police services, they all have to be funded by our general fund. We can't pay for police services out of our other city funds. So $1.2 billion general fund, currently 38.4% is allocated to the police department. About 2/3, almost exactly 2/3 of the budget in total is allocated to our public safety departments of police, fire, and EMS. And about 1/3 of our budget goes to all of our other services collectively, being public health, parks, library, etc. So just wanted to leave you with that overview of our city general fund budget. And that is all I have for you. And Jenny didn't pull the plug on me, so I must have been short enough in my comments.
So if you're, okay, you can see me. Just a couple of questions. Great presentation. Lots of information to unpack there. So if you could, you answered a lot of my initial questions, but how is the city going to fund all that?
Well, it's a great question. It will be tough with the new state imposed 3.5% revenue cap. If anybody who follows the state legislature, city of Austin and cities across the state of Texas used to be allowed to do up to an 8% revenue increase annually from property taxes. Property taxes are the primary source of funding for the general fund. Those used to be allowed to grow by 8% per year. Now they're capped at 3.5% short of a voter election. We can't fund these additional costs in a 3.5% revenue cap. There wouldn't be and maintain our other services. So really the two options are looking at a tax rate election, if the voters would approve an additional tax increase to fund the proposition, or looking at that pie chart that I showed you at the last slide, reallocating resources from some of those other areas to police services are really the two options we have to fund this proposition or any big cost center like this.
So is there a scenario where you can cut funding from the pie other than AFD and EMS?
Well, certainly there's a scenario. We don't have any solutions yet. We've not roll up our sleeves and looked at that. But, you know, as you look at the overall budget, and the way you phrased it is not touching fire and EMS, well, that's 2/3 of our budget. So whatever reductions you're making would need to come from that other third. And, you know, we would have to work through that with our city council and with our community about where those reductions would be made if a tax rate election wasn't authorized by the voters.
What about that $150 million that was taken away from APD?
Yeah, so, you know, I think there's a lot of confusion in the community about that. I would characterize it as it was restructured. The bulk of that money was put into two new funds, one called the Reimagine Fund and one called the Decouple Fund. So that money was removed from police, put into these new wonky term special revenue funds, but those funds last fiscal year continued to pay for the same police services they always did. They were just moved into a different fund. This year, because of changes in state legislation, we did dissolve those funds and move all those dollars back into the police department. That's why you saw on that police chart, our police department budget is at $442 million, which is larger than what it was in fiscal year 2019. Prior to that 1 year, fiscal year 20, where we created these separate funds. We essentially took the police department budget, broke it into three funds: a general fund piece, a reimagining public safety piece, and a decouple fund piece. But all those dollars were still in the broader city budget funding police. Again, in fiscal year 21, we needed to put them all back together. And that's what was reflected on the pie chart I showed you.
Okay. All right. Ed, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much. He cannot stay for the rest of this. And we will get going with the campaigns.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Ed.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Before we do that, I want to introduce the participating members of the campaign. So Save Austin Now, Matt Makoviak, has lived in Austin from 1984 to 2003, and since 2011, he is a graduate of public schools in the Round Rock School District and the University of Texas. Hook 'em horns. We're going to win tomorrow. He co-founded Save Austin Now in 2019 with local Democrat Cleo Patricic. He is president of a boutique PR and corporate advising firm, Potomac Strategy Group. And speaking of Cleo, she's the co-founder of Save Austin Now. She's also the founder of Democrats for a Safe Austin. She's a former probation officer and supervisor in South Austin. On the other side, no way on Prop A, Jesus Garza. You may know him. He's been around a bit. He's retired from Ascension and Seton in Austin of 2017 after serving as chief executive officer of the Seton Healthcare family. Prior to coming to Seton, Jesus served as deputy general manager for the LCRA, following 8 years as city manager for Austin. He also served as assistant city manager and deputy city manager down in Corpus Christi, and returned to Central Texas to become executive director of the Texas Water Commission. It's good to see you, Jesus. I haven't seen you in quite a bit. And Carmen Llanos Polito. She's a community organizer and the founding executive director of Vamos Austin. That's a group that organizes and mobilizes community power for health equity in Austin's Eastern Crescent. She was a youth intern and later a research analyst and organizer with the East Austin Environmental Justice Organization, PODER, from 2005 to 2011. Now, she's also holds an interdisciplinary BA in environmental studies and is a 2019 and 2020 Fulcrum Fellow with the Center for Community Investment at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. She currently serves on Austin's Planning Commission and formerly chaired the Latino Quality of Life Commission. Welcome to all our panelists. You guys ready? I know you can't, right, say anything. Okay, I'm gonna take that as a yes. So for the first opening, I'm going to individually ask the questions. So for Save Austin Now, my first question, why are you supporting Prop A?
Hi, again, my name is Cleo Patricic. Thank you so much for having me. I am a proud Latina, Mexican immigrant parents, longtime Democrat, and have devoted my entire life advocating for underserved communities like the one I grew up in, South Dallas, where my best friend was shot and killed in front of me when I was 12 years old. And this is exactly why I'm in front of you today. These last 2 years, the city council has pushed our city into chaos and lawlessness. that has impacted working class communities, communities of color, much like the one I grew up in, the most gravely. Prop A will fix the city council's failure when they defunded the police against President Biden, who I voted for, who also was against defunding the police. Exactly why? Because of the 300 police staffing crisis that was caused because of the city's failure. The situation is dire. Can I go ahead and go into slides?
No, not yet. Hold on.
Okay, sorry about that. So absolutely, we can afford to pay for the police, fire, EMS, parks, and libraries. In fact, the former 3 Austin mayors, this is 30 years worth of budget experience, all endorse our ballot initiative and say, even they admit that absolutely it's within the budget. This is one of the wealthiest cities in the country. We are number 11 largest city. We need to start acting like a large city and have a fully staffed police department. One of the take homes that I hope that you get from me, besides the red hair, is that we are not asking for more police. We are asking for a safety net, an adequately staffed police department, because right now, every single unit in our police department is either disbanded or woefully understaffed. That is how you prevent crimes. That is how you're able to do community policing. All the things that, regardless of what side we are on, we all agree we need that our police officers to do, to be a part of the community, putting bad people away, but also making sure we're preventing these crimes. Right now, we are at 1510 police officers, down from 1800 that we had just 2 years ago. And we're headed to 1400 police officers by this year end. That is a crisis situation. Again, I can't express to you how serious it is. My community, we're not calling the police, for a shooting that's happening every other day, but this is happening in underserved communities right now. We've met with East Austin community members who are begging for more police and are aware that the lack of police presence has caused an explosion of crime and criminals exploiting that. The Austin police response time right now has increased over 10 minutes. We are talking about priority 1 calls. We're not talking about getting a cat out of a tree. We're talking about shootings, stabbings that used to take 7.5 minutes are now taking 10 to 12 minutes. And on the weekend, the average is actually 12 minutes. That is heartbreaking. Every single minute counts. And I am a victim of violent crime. When I was a probation officer, I was assaulted. And I cannot imagine having to wait 1 more second to have a police officer show up to save my life. It is traumatic for me, seeing what is happening in Austin and knowing that our city officials are refusing to take this seriously. That is why Prop A is so important, because it forces the city council to finally act. They've had a year and they have done nothing.
Okay, that's a good stopping point. Thank you, Cleo. Okay, and no way Prop A. Why are you opposing Prop A?
Well, thank you for allowing us the opportunity to speak, and hello to Cleo and hello to Matt. We're looking forward to this discussion. When I worked at Seton, they had a series of things they would say to have the associates focus on what the healthcare system was about, which I think is appropriate for our city. You want a city that works, you want a city that's safe, and you want a city that doesn't leave anyone behind. And I think the problem with Prop A is it only focuses on one leg of the stool. And by focusing only on one leg, it leaves other things unfunded, which in the end, in the cumulative effect, will make us less safe as a city. It's important to emphasize that the ratio in and of itself does not make us a safer city, because it is not outcomes-based. It's an input measure. And I would prefer, when you're looking through this lens, is to try to find out the outcomes that we want and what's the appropriate mix of staffing to get that done. The budget office or the finance officers told us on the low end, 54 million, on the high end, 120 million. And I think any way you slice it and dice it, you're talking about tax increases, which will cost everyone in this community a considerable sum of money. And you're talking about budget cuts in order to be able to close the funding gap. I myself don't see how you can do the cuts that you need to make without including fire and EMS, which are also very important components of a public safety system. because you can't just get to that number with a third of the budget, the general fund budget, as the chief financial officer just mentioned. So in terms of public safety, the investments that are needed in addition to APD, EMS, and fire, you need to ensure that there's proper funding of behavioral health. That is one of the key issues that we have to grapple with this community. Our police officers are having to deal with it. We need to find a different way to deal with individuals that are having crisis from a behavioral health standpoint. You need youth programs. You need adequate funding within your parks department, which will be subject to cuts if this proposition passes. And those youth programs are absolutely essential to make sure that we invest in our youth. Broken windows. This is part of public health, the public health issues. You've got to be able to make sure that the neighborhoods are vital and strong. And those would also be subject to cuts under this proposition. And finally, when you think about the things that need to get done, you need an approach to a safe city that builds trust within your various components of public safety, that focuses on the specific measures that we're trying to achieve to reduce crime or hit those hotspots that exist, and that arrests and prosecutions are not an end; they're simply a means. We need to be focused on what the outcomes are we're trying to achieve. So again, you're going to end up cutting fire, police, EMS, libraries, parks, public health. And I think in the end, we'll be a less safe city if this proposition passes, because I don't see how you can, and also a much more expensive city. So I really would urge everyone to seriously consider voting against this proposition.
Okay, Hazley, thank you very much. Let's move on to the next topic, best practices, and no way Prop A is going to start this one. Which communities do you consider to be models for public safety staffing and funding? Is Prop A best practice? And in your opinion, what is this best practice for police staffing models?
Good morning, I'll take this one. Hi everyone, I'm Carmen Llanes Pulido with GAVA. I am also from Austin, Texas, also a proud Chicana Latina from Austin, Texas, both sides of the highway. I've lived in 78703, I've lived in 78702, and I've organized in Southeast and Runberg area, and some of the areas that are maybe the most stigmatized by high crime rates in the last 20 years. And so this is an issue near and dear to my heart. And so when I can talk about public safety staffing and what I've seen be the most successful, I'm actually gonna speak about things a little bit more holistically. To Jesus's point, we believe in a holistic and equitable approach to public safety and public health. And we've worked with police officers and in complementary ways with police officers, because we understand that that is across a variety of things. You know, we're paying a lot in property taxes, whether we're renters, owners, business owners. We're paying a lot in taxes. And the things that we want to see invested in our communities are really quality of life issues. Many of them are not things that police can actually respond to. So even in the most acute safety threat we've experienced in most of our lifetimes, where everybody was affected during the winter storm, the police who were first responders were doing very basic human functions, making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches out of their squad cars, helping get people generators, getting people to the facilities they need. We need disaster preparedness. We need trained block captains who can actually provide human support, medical support, first aid kinds of things, right? These are not necessarily policing functions. And what we've seen actually improve public safety, reduce crime rates in our areas, and bring us positive feedback from police officers is increasing our park lighting, improving pedestrian infrastructure, creating areas where community can actually gather, where there's more positive activity, which diminishes negative activity. And that's what shortens response times to serious violent crime or immediate threat to human safety, which many times is not actually a police need. It's actually an EMS or a fire need. So what we need is adaptability. The best practice comes in flexibility for our elected officials and our departments to make the moves that they need to make, not to be locked into very rigid types of response, because the reality is you don't need a gun and a badge to do many of the critical things that we need. And police officers, even the very best police officers, will never be able to run our libraries, ensure that our parks are adequately supplied with amenities, or provide some of the very human and basic needs that we've been able to expand and look at doing much more effectively with more flexibility in our budget.
Thank you, Carmen. Now save Austin. Now, do you need me to repeat the question?
No. Okay, so Austin is in the midst of the most profound police staffing crisis in our city's history. Why are we here? We're here because our city council and our mayor voted 11-0 last year to cut up to $150 million from our police budget. That's 1/3 of our $450 million police budget. Now, the deputy CFO can say, oh, it just goes to a different account. But what they did is they cut 150 police positions immediately. They cut $20 million immediately, and yes, moved $130 million over. They canceled 2 cadet classes that were scheduled, which is the only way we can replace lost officers. And they unconscionably delayed the graduation of the most diverse police cadet class in the history of our city. And so because of that, we went from 1959 authorized strength to 1809. And we went from about 1,800 officers when the year began. Now we're at 1,506 as of this morning. Do you feel safer knowing we have 294 fewer police officers today than we did at the beginning of this year? Do you feel safer knowing we no longer have an anti-gang unit? We no longer have a park police unit. Carmen, you talked about the importance of parks. We agree. It sure would be nice to have park police. Do you feel safer? Do you feel safer knowing that we don't have traffic enforcement, motorcycle cops anymore? We don't. That's why road rage and traffic fatalities are up. If you look at the sex crimes unit, if you look at the DWI unit, those are both been decimated as well. We're not able to do proactive policing. The reason that the staffing crisis is profound is that we are only now in the midst of our first cadet class since Defund the Police began a year ago. The cadet class takes 7 or 8 months of coursework. It then takes a month or 2 of field work. So you're talking about 8 to 10 months before you can graduate around 80 officers. We are losing between 15 and 25 officers to attrition every single month, and we have since this started. That's how you go from 1,800 down to 1,506. And that's going to continue. In September, we lost the most officers in our history, 25 officers who either took early retirement or resigned outright. We're likely to see a new record in October of more than 25, perhaps 30 or 35. That trend continues if Prop A fails. What happens is, if Prop A fails, we're going to be at 1,400 or even 1,300 officers by the end of this year. If Prop A passes, we will end that decline and we will come back up. We don't believe the cost estimate is appropriate and accurate because we don't believe you can hire 300 to 350 officers in the first year. And if you can't do that, then the cost estimates they put together are high. So we put it at around $30 to $35 million a year because police officers cost roughly $100,000 per officer for benefits, salary, equipment, training, their car, their gun, et cetera. Now, you asked the question, why is 2.0 the right number? 2.0 is the right number because 13 of the 15 largest cities in America have it. 200 cities over a population of 50,000 have 2.0 or more. In fact, 101 cities over 50,000 population have 2.4 or more, including Dallas at 2.9 and Houston at 2.4. As Cleo said, 3 of our former mayors, all of whom have endorsed Prop A, Lee Cook, Lee Leffingwell, and Ron Mullen, each of them said not only can we afford to get to 2.0 because we've been striving for it for over 30 years, but that we can also fund city services at the same time. So folks, this is a question about whether you think, number one, is Austin safer now than it was a year ago? And I think it's extraordinarily hard to say that Austin's safer now than it was a year ago. And then number two, do you think it would be a good thing if we had more police officers? Would it be better if we didn't have 290 fewer police officers today than we did when the year began, when our population's increasing, our violent crimes increasing, and our staffing is decreasing? That delta explains why Austin is less safe today than it's ever been, and it's getting less safe with every passing day.
Okay, Matt. So the question was, communities do you consider to be models for public safety staffing? And you jumped a little bit and answered the next question. So if you can answer the communities part.
Yeah, so if you look at Miami, Nashville, and San Antonio, they all didn't defund their police. In fact, they increased police funding and their violent crime is down. So those are models we can look at. And again, we can look at the other large cities around the country. Now, it's true, it's hard to compare exactly compare each individual city. There are lots of different data points that can affect crime. In fact, the size of a city can affect the amount of staffing that you need. In fact, one of our former mayors pointed out that Austin is almost exactly the same size as New York City from a geographic standpoint. The larger your distance, the longer distances police officers have to travel. And in order to bring response rates down, you need to have larger numbers of police officers. So we look at those cities. We don't look at the other cities. Keep in mind, no city in America, no major city in America cut its police budget by 1/3 like we did. Other cities defunded their police, but nobody did it to the extent that Austin did it. And that is why we have seen an 80% increase. That is part of why we have seen an 80% increase in homicides year over year. You don't have to look to 1984 when Austin was a totally different city. You can look to last year or even the year before that. The trend line on homicides is scary, and it's not just homicide. It's every violent crime stat that's up at least 20% year over year.
So then is Prop a best practice?
We believe it is. We believe that the 2.0 standard is a nationally recognized standard for safe cities. It was in the PERF study that Austin conducted in 2012 that put us at around 1,900 officers headed to 2,200. If you look, 1,200 officers headed to 1,700. If you look at the staffing plan that Brian Manley and our current city manager put together in 2018, that had us moving towards 2.0 from 1,900 headed to 2,200. Folks, we didn't pull 2.0 out of the air. We're not making it up as we go. It's a number that nationally recognized experts believe is necessary for big cities. Austin's not a medium-sized city anymore. It's one of the largest cities in America. It's the 11th largest city, and we're growing very fast. We have to have our police force grow with our population increase if we are going to stem the tide of violent crime around our city.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And Matt already answered the next question about police staffing ratio. Thank you, Matt. So if No Way on Prop A want to answer the police staffing ratio question about how to plan current and future city budgets, should there be an established ratio? They want 2 officers per 1,000 residents. What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, I think what happens with the 2.0 is that it becomes mandatory, and to achieve the objective, depending on the assumptions that you adopt, whether it's the low end assumption or the high end, you're talking 2.1 or as much as 2.5. And what ends up happening is that it in terms of the way the budget is constructed now, it will require an enormous amount of resources to achieve that objective. And to fund that means that you will have to cut other city services to be able to make that happen. I think the council did hear from the community. They adopted a budget this year where they authorized 3 classes, 1 modified class. I think obviously the staff needs to move with as fast as they can to fill vacancies. That's their job. They need to get that done because you never want you don't ever want any department to be undermanned, underpersoned. And I think that's something that I think that everyone recognizes. I think what's most important about this is that, you can introduce technology. You can introduce technology that would make officers or allow officers to be more efficient. But under this proposition, you wouldn't be able to recognize that because you're fixed at a 2.0 ratio that's mandated by ordinance. And so there's no way for you to run an organization, a business or a governmental position, a government department like this, and say, I'm not going to introduce technology, or I'll introduce technology, but I can't provide for those savings that would be logical to take in doing that. The other thing is that to allow our officers to be more effective and more efficient, you may want to hire additional civilian staff. Civilian staff are absolutely important to allow officers to be more efficient. And this, again, because of the budget constraints, would make it very, very difficult for us to do. We just think this is a blunt instrument when you should be approaching, you should do the approach that's much more thoughtful with certain objectives in mind. Let me finally say about these cities that Matt talked about. I don't know how their crime rates sit against ours. I don't know the circumstances in each of those. And so it's very difficult to compare these cities together and say, well, they're doing it, so we ought to be doing it too. Austin has always been a safe city compared to these other major Texas cities. I think we still are compared to these other Texas cities. And so that doesn't mean that we don't have to focus on public safety, but it does mean that this specific proposition isn't going to achieve the objectives that the proponents think it will.
Thank you, Jesus. Matt also answered my next question about response to Ed's financial or the fiscal analysis. Do you guys agree with the city's conclusions?
And Carmen can add to this. I think the analysis that has been provided by the finance office is accurate. I think they've done the assumptions based on what they think will be needed to achieve the objectives of this ordinance. I think there could be they've called balls and strikes, if you will, and it is an objective analysis that that basically the city's going to have to, should this be adopted, I think they're going to be having scenarios that the scenarios that the budget office has put forward would be the issues that the council and the mayor will have to deal with, and as part of a budget issue. It will be some devastating cuts to your general fund departments because you've got to comply with an ordinance that says you've got to be staffed at 2.0, which could be as much as 2.1 or 2.5, depending on assumptions. So I think the budget office has done a good job.
I think I just want to add that, you saw a very low estimate. This is a very wide range. And so I think just like when we saw the state legislative limits on, increasing revenue from tax rates, we saw the city project the lowest amount and the highest amount. I think the problem here is that generally, if you speak to public policy experts, it's very ill-advised to tie yourself to ratios like this, because they tie the hands of decision makers and they're not actually able to adjust the numbers based on what they need. So I think that's what's most concerning.
Thank you. All right, let's move along. If Prop A passes, what will be the impact of the city's budget, especially with respect to the 3.5% revenue limitations established by the state? And do you expect future tax rate elections? Save Austin now, please.
So what we are asking for was approved 2 years ago. It's the exact same number. So this is basically gaslighting everyone, saying, okay, we cannot afford this. We can absolutely afford it because we were on that approved trajectory by the city council 2 years ago. So we cannot keep repeating this lie that we are asking for more police when it's the exact same. That's number one. Number two, Austin Fire Department they petitioned and were able to get the city council to pass 4 per emergency vehicle, 4 firefighters. That is their protective mandate that forces the fire officials to make sure the firefighters are safe, responding to crimes, and quickly. That is what we need for the police department, because right now what we've seen, they're not responding to crime effectively. They're not responding quickly. And what has caused working class community of colors have been on the front lines of this again. This is what is most tragic, is that the city council is gaslighting everybody, pretending like we are okay and we are safe, when we can see for our own eyes we are not. And this is a nationwide trend. That is why President Biden, when he talked about the crime wave that is happening in other parts of the country, he said more police, and actually divert more of the American Relief Fund to more police and more community policing. So if the academics and the administration of Biden are saying we need more police, then guess what? Let's have more police. But the city council, if we leave it to them, they're going to continue to pacify everyone and act like we don't have a problem when we do, and we can feel it. Matt?
Yeah, look, so our city is going to see $40 to $50 million in new revenue just from property tax valuation increases alone next year. We believe our proposition costs $30 to $35 million in the first year. There's enough money there, folks. We had this same number of police officers 2 years ago when we were at 1959 authorized strength. 2 per thousand would be about 1940. And yes, there is always a distance between authorized strength and vacancies. But one of the reasons why we have so many vacancies right now is that people don't want to join the Austin Police Force because our city council has made clear they don't support police. They simply don't. You don't sit back and let 290 positions get cut over 1 year. You don't have this ridiculous situation where we cannot even respond to 911 calls unless it's life-threatening or the assailant is on the premises. You don't let specialized units get cut. You don't let only 4% of scheduled police shifts be fully staffed. Only 4% of the time is every police officer who was scheduled able to serve a shift. That puts every police officer at greater risk. It makes police officers more likely to escalate rather than de-escalate because they think they're at greater risk. We're literally doing the opposite of what you should be doing. We should be increasing community policing, which is what we do. We should be increasing training, which is what we do. We should go back to a baseline standard of 2.0 per thousand, which we've been striving for 30 years. And yes, we should take it away from the mayor and the city council. They have shown they have absolutely no interest in making our city safe for everyone who lives here, everyone who visits, every woman that wants to walk around downtown or walk around on Town Lake or go to a restaurant or go to a bar and feel safe. We have to take this away from them. And the voters can step up beginning Monday and on November 2nd, Election Day, and say, yes, we are going to demand that Austin be a safe city for everyone. We're going to show that the city supports law enforcement, even if City Hall does not.
Thanks, guys. Now to the other side, same question.
Oh, I mean, there's no question that should Prop A pass, that one of the tools that the mayor and council will have is to increase taxes. And there's no question that they may decide to increase above the rollback rate, which is more than 3.5%. That's the ceiling that has been set by legislature without having to call for an election. So I think that's in our future. There's as a potential in our future. With respect to how budgets work, I can say with the new tax roll that would be available to in the subsequent budget, the 23 budget. My sense is that there'll be only about 20 million. So it's a little different from the number that Matt just talked about a minute ago. And so that money will be deployed. Now, one of the things that has not been talked a lot about is that cities are going to begin to face the inflationary pressures that are out there today. I think the Fed put out a number last week or yesterday that the annualized rate is in excess of 8%. When they begin to put a budget together, they're going to have to recognize some increases in terms of supplies, equipment, et cetera, which is going to eat into some of that new revenue that comes into the city, and that's from the tax rolls. Now, I think that the issue here is that this is an expensive proposition. I think that we may have elections in our future to fund this, but this doesn't mean, though, that when there are vacancies that Matt talked about, the 290, those are authorized to be filled. And that's why we need to do these classes that were approved in the 22 budget. We need to add those classes again in the 23 budget and be diligent about filling those vacancies that he talked about. So I do think that that's also in our future, even without this proposition. That's, I think, what's going to happen. Carmen, you may want to add to that.
Yeah, I just want to say that, there are critical investments we need in this city now, and we will need them even more in the coming decade. We need better disaster preparedness. We need secure infrastructure that's going to protect people from the increasing amounts of flooding and climate stressors and threats to the power grid that we're experiencing. We need investments in public health. We need to make sure that we're continually able to vaccinate people, people in the lowest crime areas of Austin, which are actually the places with the most wealth, not the places with the most police. We're coming to the Eastern Crescent to get vaccinated when nobody else could get them the Moderna vaccine that they wanted. So if we want these critical investments in our parks, in our libraries, in our public health, in the safety of our infrastructure, these are not policing duties. And we cannot continue. First of all, we've been struggling with a third of the entire general budget to cover all of those needs. Look at the library budget. Look at 100 million in deferred maintenance in parks. We could have all of our aquatics. Our kids could actually have pools and rec centers and places to go to if we allocated this kind of funding over. But we wouldn't do that because it would be such a hit to some of our critical needs like fire and safety and EMS. So our government we need flexibility in our budget. The funding has been there for APD. It's disingenuous to say that Austin doesn't care about police when they are the best paid police officers in the state, when we have some of the highest investments per capita across the state, when we have the lowest crime rate of the major cities in Texas. We have plenty of funding for our police. We need better management, we need adaptability, and we need investments into the things that are going to make policing easier for the officers who actually dedicate their lives to it.
Thank you, Carmen. This next question is for Save Austin Now, and it has to do with the recruiting. Matt, you touched on it earlier. If Prop A passes, how is that going to affect recruiting? Because the recruiting guys, I went out and visited them. They're very challenged now, trying to make up for the delayed classes. They are holding night events. If Prop A passes, how are they going to do this?
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so recruiting is a challenge. And again, it's a challenge because we defunded our police and we sent a message to the world that Austin doesn't care about police. That's made it harder. So when our electorate shows that we do care about police, that we do support police, that we're going to overturn defund the police, that's going to go a long way. Look, right now it's very hard to be a police officer anywhere in the country, but it's very hard here because they don't feel like they have been adequately supported. They feel like they're at greater risk. They're overworked, they're overstressed, and there are other issues that they're dealing with as well. We see these PR bonds that are being issued, and we're seeing people go out and reoffend, and that's affecting their policing as well. So all these issues are connected. From our standpoint, we do address both recruitment and attrition in Prop A, and you may not know this if you haven't studied it. Number one, we have an incentive for police officers who are proficient in any of the 5 most spoken foreign languages in our city. We do that because not only is it important to improve communication, but it's also going to be a good recruiting tool for minority applicants. And we want to see a police force that reflects the racial makeup of our city as much as possible. On the retention side, we have retention pay in here. And I think it was detailed there by the deputy CFO. We think that's important as well. And the retention pay is aimed at our best officers, retaining our very best officers who are current on the good conduct medal status. That means that they've never had a serious complaint against them. They show up for every shift on time, and they mentor other officers. And they're going to get retention bonuses. Look, folks, the current budget that they weren't going to do without the state law requiring them to do it, does everything except address the staffing crisis. Okay. It allows 2 cadet classes over 18 months. Cadet classes start with 100 people, they graduate 80. That's 160 people over 18 months. We're losing 15 to 25 a month. If you say it's 15 a month over 18 months, that's more than the people we're losing. So not only do we not stay at 1,500, we actually go down further. Okay, this is the central lie of the No Way on Prop A folks and the city council and the mayor. They're saying, hey, don't blame us, we put the money back in. The money is not the only issue. The issue is the staffing crisis. We went from 1,800 to 1,500, headed to 1,300. The only way to turn that around so that we have specialized units again, so we can bring response rates down to priority 1 911 calls, so we can do proactive policing, so we can have scheduled shifts fully staffed, is to pass Prop A. It's the only plan on the table that's actionable. And yes, as I said before, we have to take this away from the mayor and the city council. They have shown how irresponsible they are, how little they care about public safety, how they will not admit they made a mistake. They did that on the homeless camping disaster. They've done it again here. And so again, we're going to have to clean up their mess. And that's why we're working on this as hard as we are.
Thank you, Matt. This next question is for No Way on Prop A, and it has to deal with the homicides being at an all-time high, traffic fatalities being at an all-time high, increased police response times. We just had an initiative where sworn police officers are not responding to non-emergency calls as of October 1. What is your answer to policing in Austin then?
Well, I mean, I think the council has authorized in the budget for fiscal year 22 the cadet classes that will be necessary to add to that staffing that we've been talking about this morning. That's going to be ongoing. In my judgment, the council is going to do this in subsequent fiscal years as well. I want to take a step back a little bit, though, as to why some people may say, well, why were they eliminated? Well, you know, delays are not something new. I served at the city 8 years as manager. There were delays to classes from time to time because we had to retool the curriculum. We couldn't get the proper number of recruits to fill a class, et cetera. There are reasons for this. And I think now, the message has been heard by the mayor and council. I think it's going to be the manager's responsibility to continue to aggressively request all of the budget for the police department to deal with getting the staffing up to an acceptable level. With respect to the announcement that Chief Chacon made here a week ago or 2 weeks ago, when I read that, I was a little puzzled because it's not, as an individual who's had to deal with property crime at my own home, I didn't see a police officer. This was several years ago. I saw a technician who come and took fingerprints, they took a report, et cetera. So when I read that, I didn't think there was much. That's something that the city had been doing now for a while, even though he felt the need to make mention of that as part of that press release. Because sometimes that is the most efficient way to collect the data and the information you need so that you can follow up on some of those non-emergency responses. I think that the issue here also is that in the end, while I understand that we have the authorization for initiative and referendum, in the end, if we are dissatisfied with our elected officials, I would urge citizens to go out and vote and bring in different candidates so that you can have them be more responsive to your wishes. That's the way to do this. But to put in an item that basically ties your hands, not just for this budget, for budgets on into the future, and because of the state legislature, once you add to the police budget, you can't subtract from it. That I think is a real issue. It's a real issue, not just for the existing councils, but new councils, and I think that's a real problem. And I think that we need to continue to execute on the staffing that's been authorized by the council, and I have confidence that that's what we're going to continue to do that on a multi-year basis. And Carmen may have some additional information.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to be clear that neither Jesus nor I are saying that increased crime rates are acceptable. We recognize there is an issue nationwide. We're seeing a lot of different stressors. The difference is the approach. I actually see Prop A as a very skillfully written, specific to police union language, hiring plan that is very cushy and guarantees a whole lot more financial benefits to the department as a whole at the leadership level. I have watched severe cuts to community policing and prioritization of really good officers on really good community policing duties, not because of budget cuts, but because of the internal decisions of APD leadership under their purview. So I believe in holding our department accountable and continuing some of the reforms that we've seen. We've done some really great things, barely overdue things, increasing funding for victim services, looking for more accountability there, forensics, getting people off of the streets and helping them relocate. That's being done with other money. That's not being done by police officers. So every step that we've taken incrementally year by year to get more equitable park investments, for example, to get better street lighting in places where it's missing, to support community efforts to make their communities safer, a lot of that could be wiped out by something that would take, what's been close to 40% of our budget for police and make it even bigger. And that's when you're making a 911 call to somebody who may or may not actually be able to help you based on what their position is, when really we could be doing a lot more at the front end and holistically to adapt to the issues facing us now and make our city more safe.
Thank you, Carmen.
If I can respond to that, it is offensive for her to say that this is something that was police union. We modeled our ordinance with President Biden's task force for 21st century policing. The 6 pillars of 21st policing are building trust and legitimacy, policy oversight, technology and social media, community policing and crime reduction, officer training and education, and officer safety and wellness. All of those metrics we used when we wrote our comprehensive ordinance. Also, when we cannot rewrite history, even Austin Justice Coalition, Chaz Moore indicated he did not agree with defunding the police. We are in this crisis exactly because of our city failures. I'm a Democrat. It is okay to criticize the people we elected. I voted for Mayor Adler and Kitchen. Okay, I will probably continue voting Democrat. However, I will not allow our city to continue to degrade and be in this state of lawlessness that we see on our street, especially when the people on the front lines of this are working class communities, a lot like the communities I grew up in. It is horrific for anyone not to point the finger right at the city council and their failures. We are just asking the same as what is a safety mandate for Austin Fire Department. Go ahead, Matt.
I have to say I'm a staunch independent. I just want you to know. And this is
you sound like an independent.
Irresponsible.
You sound like an independent.
Hold on 1 second. Before we move to closing, I'm going to do something a little bit off the cuff here. I'm going to allow one question for each side to ask each other, and then we'll move to closing. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Ahead, sure. Jesus or Carmen, do you feel that Austin is safer today than it was a year ago? And do you think it's a good thing the city has 290 fewer police officers than it did a year ago? Simple question.
I don't believe we're safer than we were before this pandemic hit our city horribly hard. And I don't believe the funding, the reallocation into separate accounts that went right back to the police is the reason we can say we're less safe.
That wasn't really an answer. And if you think that the safety was getting worse in the city because of the pandemic, then it would be the worst time possible to defund our police. So that makes no sense either. But go ahead, ask your question.
Why do you think an arbitrary number like this will lead to a safer city? Is it your belief that officers on the street alone can give a safer city to our community? Or do you believe that there ought to be additional programs and investments made so that that can be achieved? Because what you've done is you've made it either or. And I want to hear your answer on that.
Yeah, so we believe, in fact, it's not even what we believe, it's what the current police chief says. He says the number one deterrent to crime in our city is visible police presence. We don't have that today because, as I said before, we're 290 police officers down in 1 year. 2.0 is not an arbitrary number. It's a number that the 2012 study that the city of Austin conducted found that we needed to get to. In fact, at the end of that window in 2017, we were going to be at 2.05 police officers per 1,000. The staffing plan that Brian Manley put together, a 5-year staffing plan with our current city manager in 2018, had us at 1,900 police officers headed to 2,200 police officers, above 2.0 per 1,000. So it's not arbitrary. And I've explained already why it's a nationally recognized standard for safe cities. What I can say to you, Jesus, is that we believe that Austin is safer when you have those specialized units. I think if you asked anyone on this call, do you feel safer knowing we have an anti-gang unit? The answer would be yes. Do you feel safer knowing that we have a parks unit? The answer would be yes. Do you feel safer on the lake, knowing that we have a lakes unit? The answer would be yes. Do you feel safer knowing that we have motorcycle cops handling traffic enforcement? The answer would be yes. We don't have those things right now because we're 290 police officers down. They've had to shut down specialized units to put enough people on daily patrols. And our city's never been less safe than it is today. And folks, we can be a safe city again. We're the 11th largest city in the country. We have the budget to do this. We can do it as a city. We have to put the staffing level back where it was 2 years ago. That's all we're asking for. And we encourage you to vote for Prop A starting Monday. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. Now for closing, I'm gonna let Save Austin now go first.
Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I think we've said it all here. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with the chamber. Thank you so much. Jesus and Carmen, thank you for your participation as well. Thank you, Jenny. Look, this is a difficult time for our city. Cleo and I have been working for more than 2 years on a nonpartisan basis to fix major problems that the city council is presenting for people who live here. They pretended the homeless camping ordinance was working or in some way was compassionate when it was neither working nor compassionate. And we had to work against many of the same people that were working against us now to overturn the camping ordinance and reinstate the camping ban. We are now working to make sure we have enough police officers to keep our city safe. One of the reasons why the camping ordinance was not being enforced is because we don't have enough police officers to enforce the camping ordinance. Camping ban, excuse me. We are now, as I said before, in the most profound staffing crisis in the history of our city. It should not be too much to ask that we have a safe city with a police staffing situation that increases as population increases. We pay a lot in taxes. We should receive city services, adequate city services. And even the deputy CFO on this call admitted that nothing in Prop A requires a cut from fire and EMS specifically. They have an overall pie of about $1 billion in the discretionary fund. If Prop A passes 30 to 35 million or maybe 54 million, I think it's going to be 30 to 35 million a year. We'll go to that. And then they're going to have to figure out what to fund of everything else. This city has never cut spending on anything, and I've lived here since 1984. They found money for rental assistance yesterday. They have $1 million a bus for Capital Metro. I realize that's user fee generated. They spent $179 million on homelessness last year. Now they're proposing $515 million next year for the next 3 years. The list goes on and on and on. They simply don't want to hire more police officers. They don't want to fix the staffing crisis. That is their position. It is time for us to say, no, you're wrong. Austin's less safe than it's ever been. We have to fix this mess. We need a baseline safety net standard of 2.0 per thousand to be a safe city again. Thank you all very much.
Well, I would, let me just say that I think that the issue around staffing for police can best be handled through the budget process. Where you pass an ordinance that you have an absolute requirement that needs to be done year in and year out is the wrong way to go. It's an expensive proposition. I think the lower end is 54 million. I think the high end is 120 million. And I think that would be disastrous for the remainder of the general fund departments, because I think it will underinvest in those elements of our city that are absolutely essential for it to work. Remember, I said we ought to be a city that works, a city that's safe, and a city that leaves nobody behind. And what this does is invest only in one leg of that stool. And I think that's short-sighted and it's not the right approach. Let me also say that there have been times, I don't believe necessarily with the proposition that Austin is less safe than it's ever been. I think there has been decisions made that will allow us to fill those slots that Matt talked about. I think that's going to continue in subsequent budget years because that's important. But I think that decision is best decided by your elected officials in a way that can balance the needs for the whole city. And I think when you do an ordinance like this by specifically targeting one department, I think it is at the disadvantage and of the remaining departments. And I just think that in the end, this will be expensive. It's going to cause tax increases. And Austin may be a wealthy city, but it's also an expensive city. And for those on the lower end of the economic scale, they're going to have a difficult time paying those taxes that will be necessary to make this happen. So what I would urge everyone is to study this carefully, understand what its implications are. And then I think one of the things that has been missing is when those debates are happening at City Hall, where you have a passion about what needs to be done, I'd urge you to contribute, I'd urge you to participate, to go to those hearings so that the members of council and the mayor can hear from the public about what you think the needs are to satisfy the needs of this city.
I just want to say thank you to all the panelists and certainly to the chamber and all of the co-hosts, because I know that we're all passionate about this because we care about this city. And the reason I say I'm an independent is because I'm critical of some of our local Democrats. In my lifetime, I watched Kirk Watson's policies as mayor run us into an automatic algorithm that drained our other resources and bulked up the police budget without a lot of accountability. And it was that lack of accountability and good process that I think has led to a lot of the issues that we're facing today. It doesn't mean we don't need police. It means that we actually need to address the problems we're facing in an adaptive way. We're already spending more per capita on police than the big cities, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, cities that have much higher crime rates than Austin. And I think we need to demand more fiscal responsibility before we fork over possibly another 100 million per year. And, I think even if you look across the aisle, some of the best conservatives that I know believe that government should really be writing the checks to where they can do the most good, that they should be partnering with nimble, agile, community-based partners who can actually address lots of the other issues that don't require a gun and a badge so that police can do their jobs well. We need flexibility, we need adaptability. And I think that this policy takes us way backwards. It won't make us safer, but it could damage further the trust in our local government.
Carmen, thank you.
If I may add, community policing is non-existent right now, and that is a shame and a travesty to communities that we all speak for, because of the 300 police staffing crisis, and they're just running from calls to calls. Where is the justice in that? I do not want overworked, understaffed, stressed out police officers responding to crisis calls. That is how mistakes happen. That is why this has become a national conversation about police reform. We're actually made the situation worse for everybody. That is why we have to have this mandated, having the city finally have this safety net, not more police. Nobody wants a police state now. We just want the same safety net that the fire department has, and that will get us there.
Okay, Cleo, thank you. Carmen, Jesus, Matt, thank you so much. You can obviously hear everyone's passion. And I want to say the chat room has been on fire as well. I'm grateful, Laura, for the chamber again for hosting this, because as you can see, we needed this, right? While a lot of us have different opinions, we all love our city. We all want what's best for our city. So please, let's do some more research and let's get out there and vote. So once again, I want to thank all the panelists and for your time, and for all the sponsors, and for the co-host. This was much needed, and I just loved hearing all the opinions and passion and your dedication. So thank you guys.
Matt and Cleo, it's great to see you guys, and
great
you guys
to see everyone.
Carmen,
thanks, Jesus.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Carmen. Take care.
Thank you, Chamber.
All right, if we have a few people left, I think most of the panelists have jumped off. Let me again thank our co-hosts, all the other chambers, Rika and Abor. Certainly a lively discussion, and I hope that we achieved our purpose of providing the business community and the community at large with the best information possible. So Cleo, Carmen, Jesus, and Matt, thank you. And Jenny, thank you for being such a great moderator and a steady hand in a difficult conversation. You guys have a great weekend.